All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something that frankly completely blew my mind. We're looking at the macroeconomic architecture of extraction. Specifically, we're going to trace how one single, surprisingly simple business deal from the early 1980s literally rewired our entire digital world. It's this wild story about how the center of value shifted virtually overnight, and how that exact shift created the blueprint for the massive centralized tech monopolies we all deal with today. So, let's dive right into this. How exactly does a fairly rushed, relatively cheap software acquisition accidentally crown the first absolute kings of the digital age? To really answer that, we aren't just looking at your standard, boring business history. We're looking at a massive paradigm shift. This was the exact moment the rules of the game fundamentally changed, and the physical constraints of computing were completely bypassed by the scalable logic of software. I mean, $75,000. To put that into perspective, in today's tech world, that barely covers a startup's coffee and snack budget for a month, right? But back then, this was the ultimate financial arbitrage. This relatively microscopic sum was paid by Microsoft to completely acquire an operating system that would eventually generate billions upon billions of dollars. It fundamentally made them the dominant powerhouse of the entire personal computer era.
Part 1. The $75,000 software arbitrage.
Okay, to really understand this arbitrage, we've got to look at the timeline. It was this perfect storm of tight deadlines and, honestly, pure opportunism. It's 1980. IBM is scrambling to build a personal computer. Initially, they wanted to use an operating system called CP/M from a company called Digital Research, or DRI. But DRI hesitates. They balk at IBM's strict non-disclosure agreements, they want a royalty model instead of a flat fee, and basically, IBM walks away. Enter Bill Gates. Knowing that a small outfit called Seattle Computer Products had a rough 16-bit OS called 86DOS, which, fun fact, was originally called Quick and Dirty Operating System, Microsoft swoops in. In December 1980, they buy a non-exclusive license for $25,000. Then, just weeks before the IBM PC actually launches, Microsoft buys all the rights to 86DOS outright for another $50,000. Boom, $75,000 total. Part 2, IBM's fatal hardware assumption. That crazy fast acquisition set the stage for a massive clash of worldviews. And you can really see the divide here. IBM was operating under a totally traditional philosophy. To them, profit and dominance obviously came from physical hardware manufacturing and their proprietary BIOS chip. They thought the physical inventory, the metal itself, was the ultimate moat. Microsoft, on the other hand, saw around a corner that IBM just didn't. They realized that in the digital age, the profit wasn't in the metal. It was in scalable, logical interfaces. Whoever controlled the operating system controlled the platform, making the underlying hardware basically interchangeable. Listen to this quote from IBM rep Jack Sams. It just perfectly captures the tragic irony of their decision. If we'd bought the software, we'd have just screwed it up. IBM was in such a massive hurry, they actively wanted to outsource the software, totally underestimating what it would be worth long-term. By refusing to just build or buy the software themselves, IBM willingly wheeled a Trojan horse right inside their own gates. Part 3. The non-exclusive loophole. And hidden inside that Trojan horse was one absolutely crucial trapdoor. Microsoft agreed to supply the operating system for the IBM PC, which IBM branded as PC-DOS, but Gates shrewdly insisted on keeping the right to license that exact same software to other hardware companies under the name MS-DOS. IBM, fully believing the real value was locked inside their physical beige boxes, just agreed to it. They decoupled the software from their physical machine without having any idea of the sheer absolute power they were handing over. Part 4. Unleashing the clone market. So that single licensing loophole, that became the trigger for Microsoft's real master plan. Here's how it all played out. A company called Compaq figures out how to legally reverse engineer IBM's proprietary BIOS using a clean room technique. Suddenly, the hardware moat is gone. 100% IBM-compatible clones start flooding the market from dozens of different manufacturers. But, and here is the genius part, all those cloned physical computers still needed a brain, right? They required a universal operating system to actually run the software. And guess who is standing right there, legally protected by that non-exclusive clause, ready to sell MS-DOS to the entire ecosystem? Microsoft. The hardware turned into a cheap commodity, and the operating system became the mandatory, highly lucrative standard. Part 5. The 1689 Digital Breach. Now, let's zoom out for a second, because the sources map this onto a really fascinating sociological pattern called the 1689 breach. Historically, back in 1689, the Orange Pledge, which was essentially an early Bill of Rights, breached the absolute power of centralized monarchs, right? It demanded localized rights and returned agency back to the individual. But the sources argue that modern platform hegemony, which was basically birthed by that MS-DOS standardization, is actually a sociological regression. It's a rollback to pre-constitutional authority. It's just mapped onto raw silicon instead of physical land. And you can see how it works through this three-step architecture of extraction. Step 1, you decouple the software record from the physical hardware substrate, exactly like Microsoft did with IBM. Step 2, you establish a universal, standard interface that everyone is basically forced to use. And step 3, once you control that indispensable layer, you enclose the ecosystem. By controlling the OS, Microsoft essentially enclosed the digital commons, forcing everyone to route through their centralized toll booth. Part 6, Reign of Agentic Kings. Which brings us to the final stage of this paradigm shift. The sources call this new era agentic kingship. Because centralized powers now control these massive cloud infrastructures and operating environments, the entire relationship flips. It's called an interface inversion. Instead of you, the sovereign user, commanding a tool locally, the machine dictates the terms to you. The centralized algorithm meters out your capabilities. It's literally a digital monarch managing a passive subject. So we're left with this really stark contrast. Under platform hegemony, you and I are forced into digital tenancy. We don't hold the deed to our digital homes anymore. We're just renting access from centralized gatekeepers. The alternative, the only real way to push back against this enclosure, is agentic sovereignty. That means demanding local execution on your own physical hardware, where your software and your substrate are tied together, bypassing those central landlords entirely. Tying this all together, that $75,000 business deal back in 1981, it didn't just create a highly profitable software company. By shifting the ultimate locus of value completely away from physical hardware and deeply into the logical interface, it laid the absolute foundation for modern platform hegemony. It birthed a totally new era of centralized digital monarchs. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. As computation gets increasingly centralized, hidden behind these massive corporate cloud enclosures, what role are you going to play? Are you going to settle for being a mere tenant in a centralized digital kingdom, just renting your capabilities from an agentic king? Or are you going to fight to secure your own local execution and take back the reins of your digital sovereignty? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep building and definitely keep questioning the architecture around you. Catch you next time.